If Leningrad falls, Moscow falls. There's no question about that.
Not so sure. The question is when.
There's a lot going around the General Staff in terms of we're just going to starve them, we're going to demolish the place if we have to, we'll keep the industry and the shipyards, we don't care. And in fact, the General Staff have a conversation about saying to the Americans, do you want to take 2.5 million people as refugees?
German military intelligence underestimated the size of just about every single branch of the Soviet armed forces by 2 to 1, or in many cases closer to 3 to 1.
There's another issue, is the Soviets see it coming.
Is this not kind of a microcosm that Germany sort of overwhelming the Soviet Union was never going to be possible?
Basically, towards the end of the year, you're losing 50,000 people a month to starvation.
If the siege of Leningrad is successful, does it fundamentally alter the course of the war? Stalingrad is considered the most famous battle of the Second World War, largely due to its scale and sheer loss of life. But towards the western edge of the Soviet Union, there was another brutal siege that is less widely mythologized, yet lasted an astonishing 872 days. Leningrad. By August of 1941, German Army Group North had reached the city's outskirts, yet Hitler issued a halt order not to push on with a full-scale invasion. He preferred instead to shell the residents into submission, literally starve out the city, and begin what would become one of the most destructive and horrifying blockades in history. Over 1 million civilians were killed, with more than 3 million casualties in total. Yet Leningrad did not fall, and in January 1944, the siege was finally broken by the Soviets. So what if that halt order was never issued, and the Germans had pushed on with a full invasion? I'm Fergus Macphee, and welcome to History Undone, the show where we look at how the briefest of moments can shape our world. Every episode, we focus on a different military campaign or a tide of history, and with the help of our experts, we ask whether split-second decisions could have changed the outcome and history itself. Today, it's the Siege of Leningrad, a 2 years, 4 months, and 19-day-long blockade, which saw Adolf Hitler fail to break one of the Soviet Union's industrial centres. If he had succeeded, would it have changed Barbarossa, Lend-Lease, and the result of the war itself? These are, of course, questions for our experts, and joining me today, as ever, the historian and author Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, and returning to the channel once again, the senior lecturer at the Royal Military Academy, Dr. Klaus Schmider. Welcome to you both. Now, we have in front of us our favourite map of Europe circa 1940. Leningrad is just here on the map. You will, of course, know it's St. Petersburg in modern-day time. It links up to the Gulf of Finland and the Baltic Sea here, and of course you have Finland just directly north of it. Chris Parry, always a pleasure to have you on History Undone. The first question to kick this off then is, why Leningrad?
Okay, right. Well, Leningrad is a major industrial centre. It produces 11% of everything that comes out of the Soviet Union. It's got major shipyards. It's strategically significant, as you said, at the head of the Gulf of Finland. It's one of 3 objectives of Operation Barbarossa in its first stages, which is Leningrad, Moscow itself, and the forces that are clustered in front of it, and also a drive down towards the Donetsk. And in fact, from very early on, Leningrad is specified as the primary target, and it maintains that position till quite late into the autumn of 1941. So if you remember, we had Barbarossa launched on the 22nd of June, 1941. 3 army groups, Army Group North, comprising 26 divisions. In fact, the commanding general, von Lieb, he actually wants 35, but he's only got 26. You've got Army Group Centre heading towards Moscow and trying to avoid the Pripyat marshes, about 60 divisions, and another 60 division army group heading towards Kiev and Kharkov down here in the south. Now, what we need to remember is the early planning for Barbarossa said we're not going to go for Moscow. We're going to go for a double encirclement to the south and to the north. So Leningrad was always part of that. There's no question about that. But then the General Staff, particularly under Halder, said, look, we want to try and fix as many Russian troops as we can in front of Moscow. But by going for Moscow, we can do that. And also, I think there was a bit of showmanship by some of the German generals saying, we've done Paris, let's do Moscow now. And I'm afraid there is a drive for that, and it does actually play a part in what happens in Leningrad.
Klaus, welcome back to History Undone. Another aspect is something we've talked about on the show in other episodes in the past. Adolf Hitler's ideology, his hubris. Leningrad, a lot is made of it, the fact that it has Lenin in the name. I mean, how much does that matter really to Nazi Germany?
Not that much, I'd say. It's just that it is a very obvious target. It's relatively close by. The German invasion jumps off here. Leningrad, just by virtue of the distance, by virtue of the fact that it is an important communication hub, by virtue of the importance of its port and its facilities, is a very important target. It's really something which you would struggle to simply ignore.
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, as you could say in a different kind of way, they're going to be forced to ignore it, but only because they're forced.
Yeah. Well, it's an industrial hub, as Chris said. You mentioned the port there.
Yeah.
Is part of the strategy also to try and eliminate some of the Soviet Navy?
Well, the Soviet Navy is hugely overrated. No, it's a matter of fact. There's still a big fat book to be written about this. I mean, ultimately, even though at appalling cost, the other two services, especially the army, come out trumps. But the Soviet Navy, numerous though it was, will ultimately fail.
Yeah.
It's true enough that, strictly speaking, if you want to eliminate the Navy, you need to seek it out in its final lair, which is Kronstadt and, of course, Leningrad. But the thing is that by virtue of the geography of this part of this Gulf here,
The Gulf of Finland.
yeah, the Finns and the Germans will find a way of laying out, mine barriers here at the narrow point, which are actually going to do a pretty good job of keeping the Red Banner Baltic Fleet in its pen. Yeah. And it's not much of a threat, really. It's not much of a threat.
And a word on Finland, Chris, while we're there. Obviously, just to the north of Leningrad, not strictly a Nazi ally, but certainly a co-belligerent.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And of course, there's history between Finland and Russia. Was a Grand Duchy, of course, originally, and has just been involved in the so-called Winter War. Yeah. So the Finns are quite keen to get some of their territory back that they've lost in that situation. And so they're part of this, and they're blocking off the north. They're part of it. What's really interesting is we'll see, they're not keen to get that involved. They just want to go to the borders that they used to hold. They don't actually do any sort of air attacks on Leningrad, even though the Germans want them to. And the troops just hold their ground on the previous borders. But as Klaus says, they hold the whole northern part of the Gulf of Finland, and they bottle up particularly the Russian submarines that later in the war do go out and cause quite a lot of damage in the Baltic Sea. But by that stage, of course, the Germans have lost control of the Baltic anyway, so it's not really important. Critically, they're just to the north of Lake Ladoga, which is very significant. And they don't really operate across that, and certainly not with air power at all. Very important.
We'll get into the siege in just 1 second now, Klaus, the moments of it. But as I mentioned in the introduction, they get to quite close to the city perimeters and they issue that halt order. And is the thinking behind Hitler that they don't want to go into the city and face kind of close combat, hand-to-hand fighting, which obviously they then encounter in Stalingrad a year later?
Probably not. As far as we can tell, and I'm happy for somebody to dispute this, Hitler doesn't really develop a thing. A creeping obsession about house-to-house fighting until we get to the fall of Kiev, which at that point is still a couple of weeks in the future. And at Kiev, what happens is that the Soviets did a really good job at picking out a number of public buildings where they felt that, well, if we were occupying this city, this is the place where we would put our core headquarters. And then they rigged these places for demolition with timed devices and inflicted quite heavy loss of life in the first 3-4 days of the occupation. And it's at this point that Hitler, you could say, starts to develop a bit of an obsession about avoiding, if at all possible, house-to-house fighting. No, what spares Leningrad, the occupation, is the fact that, well, two facts really, is that Russia, as you invade it, gets wider and wider and wider.
Yes.
Grant you, that was foreseeable. Something else wasn't foreseeable, namely that German military intelligence underestimated the size of just about every single branch of the Soviet armed forces by 2-1, or in many cases closer to 3-1. I mean, just to give you an idea,
it's catastrophic.
The two air arms of the Soviet armed forces have more airframes between them than the rest of the world's air forces put together. That's an awful lot. And even while the Germans end up winning virtually all battles in 41, that doesn't change the fact that they realize they've got a tiger by the tail. And by August 41, they're really having a conversation about deprioritizing some theaters. And as we will see, inevitably, it's Army Group North, which is the one army group that is already the most under-resourced, which is going to get the chop. It's felt that, well, we've got other fish to fry. And yes, a last lunch is made at Leningrad, and the big controversy among historians is if that particular panzer element had been left in place for another 7 days, would that have been enough to deliver Leningrad to the Third Reich?
There's another issue, is the Soviets see it coming.
Okay.
So they've got one of Stalin's Bolshevik buddies in place called Voroshilov, and he doesn't want to bring food and supplies in because it actually shows up his organization. So he doesn't take opportunities to actually bring in all the supplies that are needed. But he's replaced by Zhukov, who's just come from the east. He's trusted by Stalin. He's sent up there, and he gets the citizens pretty ruthlessly working. 15,000 miles of trenches, 380 miles of wire entanglements, 5,000 strong points, nearly 400 miles of timber and earth emplacements. So the place is well fortified by the time the Germans get there. And in the outskirts, they come across, as Klaus said, army troops they don't expect to see. No. And so you're seeing a lot, and even as the place is being invested by the Germans, they're surrounding it, you're seeing constant counterattacks that they're not expecting. And von Lieb is saying, look, I just don't have enough troops to do this. I can do a distant blockade, but I can't get close in because of this. And in fact, they don't complete the encirclement, as we'll see as we get into detail. So as Klaus says, as the campaign with Barbarossa goes on, people are saying all the time, OK, we've got a chance of Moscow here, we've got a chance of Moscow. And we're seeing 4th Panzer Group in particular being denuded of its armour to help out Army Group Centre. Because what I think deals the death blow to taking Stalingrad is you see a couple of major victories at Minsk and Smolensk on the way through Army Group Centre's area here. Capturing huge numbers, hundreds of thousands of troops in each cases. And I think it gives them confidence that they can strike for Moscow very early on. The other issue is the Soviets are attacking on what I call the internal flanks between Army Group North, Army Group Centre and South. And this is unsettling the General Staff and saying we just don't want to be caught here or encircled. So there's this constant neurosis about what's going on around Army Group Centre, where they're seeing more troops than they think. As Klaus said, the ratios of aircraft and armour is quite staggeringly in the Soviets' favour.
Absolutely,
and as you're going further east, of course, all these vehicles are breaking down, people are losing sleep, the logistics train isn't actually working. Oh, and by the way, we've got the mud season coming at the end of October. We better get on with it.
Well, hold that thought, because the sheer scale of the Soviet Union is a theme that we'll come back to in this episode. But for now, let's zoom in and focus a little bit on the siege itself. Okay, we have a new map in front of us now showing the area in and around Leningrad. Klaus, I'm going to come to you first, because in September 1941, there's a little bit of there's a near miss here by the Germans.
Yes. First of all, back in July, the panzer element outpaces the infantry. And this happens in the other theaters as well, but nowhere as dramatically as in this case. And the Panzergruppen commander is essentially told, hold that bridgehead across the Luga, because you and 3 panzer divisions, you are not going to take a city of 3.5 million, which is understandable. You need supporting infantry. And they do take a while in coming up in substantial numbers. And in part, they are delayed by a Red Army spoiling attack in mid-August. It's Staraya Rusa, about here, which drives into the flank of 16th Army. Yeah. It finds the seam between 2 corps, and the Germans actually have to retreat in helter-skelter fashion for 50 kilometers, which is actually not fairly rare occurrence in those days. So that by the time they've regained their composure, the basic decision to deprioritize Army Group North has already occurred. On September 4th, the head of Army Group North, Rittmeister von Leeb, he is told, gets a visit from head office, the Army Chief of Staff, and the Army Commander-in-Chief. Listen, you have another 10 to 14 days, and after that, we'll start pulling away the goodies, because we have decided in the end that priority must be given to the other theaters. And so he knows he's on the clock. He knows he's on the clock. He's already running late. And a belated attempt is made to pull out all the stops. And by about September 12th, they've actually pierced the inner defensive ring of Leningrad in a number of places. They're getting alarmingly close to maybe, just maybe, getting into the city.
It's interesting because till quite late, the priorities are established from the General Staff, from Hitler himself. It's Leningrad first, Donetsk, and then Moscow. And then you see this progressive drift away towards Army Group Center in the wake of these real successes at Smolensk and Minsk. And the order goes out, we're just going to bomb and starve them.
And so, Chris, then the thought behind the blockade, are they pretty confident it's going to work and just, force them into submission?
Yeah, I mean, they say we're just going to bomb and starve them into submission. And that's what the aviation starts to do. They really don't care about the population. They don't care if they die. They don't care if they flatten the place apart from the industrial output and the shipyards. And the talk amongst the General Staff actually takes place. Should we say to the Americans, do you want to take 2.5 million refugees? Quite staggering that's even being considered. But they want to make it a wasteland. They don't care about what goes on in that city.
Yeah, and Klaus, just one question on this. Some people consider this almost like a genocidal campaign. I mentioned at the top, is that perhaps why it's not something, at least, that's talked about as much as other battles, because it's a real kind of catastrophic kind of loss of life?
It's an absolutely horrific story. And I mean, the first winter, 41-42, sees 800,000 fatalities alone, mostly civilians. I think that under the laws of war that prevail today, you would definitely be in a position to make a case for a genocidal campaign. The laws of war as they existed in the 1940s, shall we say, were a bit more flexible, gave more leverage.
Generous term.
Gave more leverage to senior officers in deciding how they waged the campaign. And as far as siege operations are concerned, there was this one instance where Leeb received orders that if Soviet civilians were to start flooding out of Leningrad in large numbers, because they were literally just searching for food and shelter, he was to order his troops to drive them back with machine gun fire. Now, this never happened because the Soviet authorities, by and large, managed to retain a grip on the situation. Had it happened, and had this order then been followed, then I think Ritter von Leeb might have found himself in a spot of bother and at his Nuremberg trial. As it was, he was acquitted of the charges that were leveled against him at Nuremberg.
I mean, twice Hitler issued a directive saying there's going to be no capitulation here. Yeah. That's the key point.
Which is unique, I have to say.
I would say so, yeah.
Which is unique. I can't think of any other instance where he issues an order like that, which is, frankly, whichever way you twist and turn it, leaving aside the humanitarian aspect, is just going to be a major obstacle to conducting operations. And I can't think of a single instance where he issued an order like this in any theater of war, because it runs counter to common sense in the ordinary military sense. And it's a unique event, and it frankly it would have warranted pushback. The only explanation I have to make sense of it, or rather to explain the absence of this pushback, is that the senior officer corps felt, well, if Leningrad is delivered to us, we're going to have it anyway. And as for Mr. Hitler's plans to level the town, we'll see. Yeah. Because the Navy had already raised the voice of protest. When they heard that there were plans in hand to completely level the city, they actually said, no, you don't. Not if you want the port facilities humming and buzzing and working for us, because that's the main price. If you're ever going to have Leningrad, you need a functioning port and everything in the city that is somehow tied to having a functioning port.
I think it's worth bearing in mind at this stage that if you're age 30, about your age, Fergus, in Leningrad.
31.
You've seen 3 wars. You've seen the First World War, you've seen the Winter War, and now you're involved in this one. You've seen 2 famines, one during the Civil War, another one during forced collectivization, and 2 major political purges. So this is a city that has suffered immensely already. And we're talking, as Klaus said earlier, about major deprivation. So basically, towards the end of the year, you're losing 50,000 people a month to starvation alone. Now, the bulk of that starvation occurs in the first winter. The second 2 winters, as we'll see, it gets alleviated by the ability of the Soviets to actually get in there. But the scale of suffering in this, I think, is unique. And because of this no capitulation order and things like that, and it is quite extraordinary. And the stories that come out of it are dreadful. But we've got to bear in mind, this is a population of 3 million people that is down to 2 million. They did to evacuate some people, but 400,000 children, all sorts of casualties occur here, quite staggering levels. Yeah.
As you say, Chris, like unspeakably grim horrors. The siege, the blockade goes on for almost 900 days. But as we'll see on this new map that we've got in front of us, I know you've spoken to me about this, the encirclement itself is never fully complete.
Well, there are 2 aspects. The German army actually holds Leningrad at a distance. There isn't what we call a close blockade. So that's the first thing. Secondly, there are these routes that are open. And during the 4 months of the year when Lake Ladoga isn't frozen over, then you've got a sea route that comes around here. But for most of the time,
but when it is,
you've got ice. And the Soviets set up this road of life here. And that's a 6-lane highway, basically. And you've got trucks going along that all the time. They're being attacked from the air. They're being attacked by artillery and things like that. But that is the lifeline that after the first really bad winter keeps Leningrad and its inhabitants alive. What we need to consider, though, is that the party functionaries, if you look at the pictures of the time, the party functionaries and the army are quite well fed by comparison with the population who are absolutely starving. There's no question about that. The levels of deprivation are down to below 250 grams a day, which is what you get to support life.
That's a conscious choice on the Soviet side, what Chris just says there.
Well, that's what's available.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is at the start of the siege, the Germans give to their nutritionists calculations about how long they reckon the population can last. And they say on the basis of 250 grams a day, it's about 6 to 7 weeks.
Yeah.
And of course, the Soviets are able to resupply. They didn't help themselves, the Soviets, by not stocking up, as I said, because Voroshilov had a prestige issue associated with that. And at the same time, you're getting breakout operations by Soviet troops, and these are constantly providing irritants for the German army around here. And it's tying down quite a lot of troops here. Yeah. There's about 8 divisions up here actually trying to hold this down, which could be better used somewhere else.
And if we go into 1942 then, Klaus, Germany do sort of plan another full assault on the city, Operation Nordlicht.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nordlicht is something that was to have occurred concurrently with the operations in Ukraine and into the Caucasus. And a number of assets had already been moved north, especially heavy artillery, in order to make this possible. So this wasn't just, you could say, something that just a figment of somebody's imagination. You could say just a staff paper. No, this was the real deal. Or was to be the real deal because, well, ultimately the plug was pulled on it because it was felt that, well, there were simply too many other fires to put out. And there was also a Soviet attack here, just as the Nordlicht forces were moving into position, where the defeat of which consumed a lot of the ammunition that had been set aside for the offensive. And ultimately it was then cancelled. And that was the last time where the taking of Leningrad was seriously contemplated.
Yeah, that's when it's gone.
Yeah, and you've never got enough troops up here to do this. I mean, you look at the amount of Soviet troops that are being flooded in here all the time, and they're fresh troops in many cases as well. And you're taking counter-battery fire. This is the other thing. And so what the Germans have said is, we'll just fix Leningrad in position. We've got other stuff to do. And of course, you have this famous sort of halt order before Moscow that takes place in late 1941 that prepares the German army in the east for the thrusts up until March, of course, of 1942. That, of course, has an effect on Leningrad. We're just forgetting about that now. We just need to hold it off on our flank to make sure it doesn't interfere. The big problem for Army Group Centre is the Soviets have identified that as really the area they've really got to operate, and they're flooding 10 armies into that to try and deal with Army Group Centre.
Is the moment that then this changes, the Soviets managed to do something quite extraordinary. This little section on the south shore of Lake Ladoga here, I think it's about 5 to 7 miles long. They managed to build a stretch of railway, which how on earth, with everything we've just mentioned, how on earth did they manage to do that under
which the Germans intermittently shelled. This is Operation Istra in January, February 1943, and they essentially pierce this German blocking position by holding on to this rim here. Yeah. To this rim.
It's about a mile wide, I think, isn't it?
It's about 5. It's about 5.
5?
It's ridiculous. I mean, the big question we need to ask ourselves here, why, especially as the Russians push back in early 42, why they don't make a concerted effort to pierce this position. Yeah. It really should have been possible. But I mean, this narrow gauge railway line, which they managed to keep going from about February 1943, is, in terms of relieving the civilian population, the big breakthrough. From that moment onwards, deaths from starvation are reduced to a trickle. Yeah,
and that then sets up their offensive in 1944.
Well, in fact, they essentially wait for relief from the line going forward, to tell you the truth. I mean, the front goes forward at such a rate after 1942 that Leningrad basically is relieved in that sense. It's not really relieved as part of a specific strike. It just happens that the Red Army has moved that far west.
Yeah. One thing I want to get across, Klaus. You look at this map, and I know we've said that the encirclement was never fully complete. But you look at this map, you see, you have Finland to the north. You see how surrounded they are. Horrendous blockade, nearly 900 days, and yet Leningrad still doesn't fall. Is this not kind of a microcosm that Germany sort of overwhelming the Soviet Union was never going to be possible?
Well, you've seen with other cities, the German army has been able to overwhelm them. I mean, the issue is to compare it with Stalingrad. You know, why couldn't the Germans hold out in Stalingrad? The simple fact of life is they were encircled and you couldn't get these supply routes in. There's quite a lot of ammunition and other stuff coming in. There's actually crated aircraft coming in as well. That's the other thing. So all the means to actually sustain the fighting forces and to a lesser extent the population are in place. So it's the inability, I think, to completely encircle the place that actually means that they can hold out. The Germans don't prevail.
I completely agree with what Admiral Parry just said. I'd just add that if there's one place in the Soviet Union where the population can be said to have been heavily politicized, successfully politicized, not just for show, by the Soviet regime, then Leningrad is probably it. Even if the Germans all of a sudden, I could say, had a rush of blood to the head and had decided, say, in September 41, for the sake of argument, listen, we're going to stop treating people like dirt. Maybe we should make a bit of an effort to bring them over to our side, offer them, you could say, a roadmap to a post-Soviet peace. I mean, this is the one place where it wouldn't have worked.
The ironic thing about this is after the war, Stalin purges and kills the people that actually conducted the successful sort of resistance of the siege. He can't stand that some of the prestige is being taken away from him. It's really ironic. It's the most politicized space. There's no question about that. And yet Stalin really goes for the local Politburo as well.
You just don't want to stand out in the Soviet Union. It's the sort of thing that gets you killed.
Or falling out of a window in modern-day Russia.
Or in modern-day Russia, you end up down an elevator well.
Well, that seems like a good thought to leave this section and move on to the next part, because that is, of course, the real history of what happened during the siege of Leningrad. Now let's do what we love doing on History Undone and undo it. This is History Undone. Okay, time now for what we love doing here on History Undone. We're going to ask ourselves some long-term questions. Had Germany managed to take Leningrad during the Second World War? Now, Chris, we've already described perhaps how it might have happened. If Leningrad does fall, what is kind of the immediate effect?
Well, the immediate effect is you've got a major port and a major industrial centre right in the heart of the Soviet Union, and you've got very good communications to take you down to Moscow.
Absolutely.
So you're opening an interesting front here, and it's then a decision as to whether you basically redeploy your forces to ensure you can go down that route. I think you've got a reorientation of Barbarossa to reflect that, to tell the truth. My only sort of doubt in this area is whether the major assault that ends up in the Battle of Bryansk, which involved the capture of nearly 660,000 Russian troops, goes ahead immediately, because you've got winter coming on, of course. Do you consolidate here and allow that to go forward, or do you redeploy to make sure you've got a two-arm attack coming in from the north and also from the west?
Is it as simple, Klaus, as you take Leningrad, you instantly go to Moscow, or does it also depend a little bit about the other part of Barbarossa that's happening down here to the south?
Well, you certainly are going to free up a dozen divisions. Okay, the 18th Army now essentially is turning to you and asking for new orders. It's not something to be sneezed at. I think Admiral Parry just raised a hugely important question. If we are going to give Leib those panzer forces for an extra, well, let's face it, it's always going to be end up being at least 8 to 10 days. You are cutting it mighty fine for Vyazma Bryansk. And let's face it, Vyazma-Bryansk is already the best case scenario, and even so, they failed outside Moscow. Plus, if you delay Vyazma-Bryansk by just a few days, you run into trouble. Why? Because the weather, which is what German generals are constantly complaining about in Russia, and on a number of occasions, Vyazma-Bryansk being the most eminent, actually favored them. It actually favored them because they run straight to the very edge of the autumn rains. And they only start coming down once they have sealed the pocket. It's like the weather god is in league with German high command. And that would not have happened if you would just put it off by even 3, 4, 5 days. Yeah. Then all of a sudden, the roads turn into quagmires while you only have a half sealed pocket, and a very large number of Russian troops would have escaped. Yeah.
And if they don't put it off by a few days, are we saying then within a couple of months you've taken Leningrad and Moscow?
No, if Bryansk doesn't happen, you're not going to get anywhere near Moscow because you've still got nearly 1 million Soviet troops in front of you. I think if you delay it till the mud season starts, any thought of an assault on Moscow from any direction has to wait for the spring thaw. But you can consolidate quite significantly here in Leningrad. I mean, the route up the Baltic is now clear. I mean, one aspect that you might want to consider over the winter season is bringing the Finns much more on side. They can help you guard your flank. That's the main thing. Any sort of attacks from the Soviets from this direction. Also, you can start thinking about, are we going to do a two-prong attack down here? I think as soon as the mud season starts, Klaus, you're consolidating rather than actually attacking, aren't you? It's as simple as that. I mean, the Soviets do prove better at dealing with that. But again, you've got an issue at this stage in North Africa that Rommel's having a bit of a hard time. So you're thinking, okay, we might actually have to send some of the aviation. In fact, that's what happens. Is the second air group actually gets sent down there and, of course, has an effect in front of Moscow. Even the weather coming on doesn't mitigate that loss. So you might be able to spare some resources as a result to help Rommel out in North Africa. Because remember, at this stage, he's been pushed back by Ritchie and Cunningham right to his start line.
In terms of resources, Klaus, perhaps, as Chris said, you've got the Finns on side, you've consolidated up here. You're also in control of a key port. Yeah, what does that? How does that change here?
It's certainly the port is the key factor here, because let's face it, when you discuss Barbarossa, it's always logistics. Yeah. And these issues will still go on affecting army groups south and center, but frankly, as far as Army Group North are concerned, all your problems have just been solved. It is like one of the largest ports in Europe, and you have got a new transport hub to project your power either down to Moscow or this way up to link up with the Finns and cut the railway line coming down from Murmansk. Not sure about both. That might be a bit much. But all of a sudden, you could say Army Group North finds a new place in the drafting of Third Reich strategy.
Is that strategically important up here?
Oh, very much. I mean, we've got to remember, Lend-Lease comes in through Murmansk and Archangel. So if you're cutting this off, it's quite serious.
So we get told off occasionally in the comments of this show for putting too much emphasis on Lend-Lease. But it's incredibly important, and Leningrad would be at the heart of that.
Absolutely. I mean, I also believe that if Leningrad falls, Moscow falls. There's no question about that. I just don't see how, if you actually pause and make sure you don't go for a major attack after Bryansk, you recognise that you've got time to wait until the spring offensive. Not only do you have the ability to attack in the centre, but also down here as well. And I think you're diverting a huge number of Soviet armies up here as well, because they're smarting at this, I would suggest.
Do you agree, Moscow falls?
Not so sure. The question is when.
It's in the spring.
In the spring.
I think you wait till spring.
I must say that knowing what I do about people like Franz Halder and Brauchitsch, I'm sure that even if they had found themselves in a position where, shall we say, Vyazma Bryansk is only a half success, even if they find themselves in a position where they have to push a last lunge on Moscow, 8 days to the right, because, well, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a delay of, shall we say, 8, maybe 10 days. I'm positive they would have tried it regardless. This is something they are, don't get me wrong, I can't prove it, but to me, they were just hankering for Moscow, and it took them so long to finally batch and bully Hitler into a position where he was willing to say, oh, by all means, if you think you must have Moscow, go and take it. And I'm sure they would have done it. I mean, the Battle of Moscow would have started 8 days later and probably ended up with a German defeat.
Chris, you're not so sure, are you?
Well, I'm not sure. I think it alters the strategic geometry if you take Leningrad. That's my point. And I think Hitler himself may have intervened here and said, that was my priority. Okay, I've got Leningrad now. Moscow was bottom of the list. And the Donetsk was actually my priority. So I wonder if he would have said, actually, I'm not going to be forced to a halt order. I'm choosing to do a halt order and say, well, let's consolidate. Let's bear in mind, you know this, Klaus, 30 to 40% of every division was pretty clapped out by this stage.
True.
You had eight operational divisions, probably another 40 that could be brought up to speed. They're at the end of their tether. And as we know, the attack on Moscow, in retrospect, wasn't going to be successful for all the reasons we've discussed before. So I just wonder if Hitler himself at this stage would have said, OK, we've got to have another think of this, because I wasn't expecting this to fall into my lap. And so how are we going to do this then? And of course, if you look at the climatic difference between here and here, it's quite significant.
Well,
actually.
absolutely, yeah.
And in fact, if you read the diaries and the accounts at the time, this bit is not as muddy. So I just wonder if the axis of attack would have actually swung northwest and possibly that way. And you wait for the spring, you build up, and as you say, Klaus, fantastic hub, and you hit them from the northwest.
Okay, so if we go with that, if we do go and say that Leningrad and Moscow fallen, both ideologically important, strategically important, what happens next with the Soviet Union?
Okay, I think what was planned just before the battle in front of Moscow happens. You get the Soviet government coming to what is Kazan now, to the east. I think the Soviets will put out what they in fact did, put out bids for a ceasefire and also an armistice at the time. And we then go from there. My own view has always been that the Germans, politically and militarily, essentially just wanted European Russia. They didn't want to go beyond the Urals. So I suspect some sort of armistice might have come into play there. Depends how sore the Russians were at the time at losing Leningrad and Moscow.
An armistice. Okay, Klaus, one other thing. Forgetting about Moscow for 1 second, if Leningrad falls, do the Soviet Union, do they try and get it back?
Not with the resources they have at the time, and not with Moscow
and the big
being the first priority. No, in short, everybody would have been laser focused on pushing the Germans away from Moscow, and Leningrad would have had to take a backseat.
I wonder if the Army Group South would have swung up, to tell the truth. If there's a real chance that you're going to actually implement your original plan, which was coming through the north and the south. It's going to work now. So rather than you just fix in front of Moscow with Army Group Centre, and then use south and north to come in and attack together.
Okay, forgive me. I'm going to throw in another little counterfactual here.
That's what we're here for.
What if instead, we've spent the whole episode saying, what if the siege was successful?
Yeah.
What if they just didn't go for Leningrad at all?
Like at all?
At all.
It's never going to happen.
No?
All the literature around the German General Staff is absolutely frightened silly about being attacked in the flank. Everything you're talking about there, I mean, the big issue why the original double encirclement didn't work is because they couldn't fix these huge Soviet armies in the center, which would attack you in the flank. That was Halder's prime justification. Moscow only came later. And so I suspect leaving that flank wide open would have been very unattractive to German generals.
I'm inclined to agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are we saying, key industrial base linked up to the Baltic, but are we saying if the siege of Leningrad is successful, does it fundamentally alter the course of the war?
You mean if the city falls a year later, September 42?
Sure.
No, it doesn't.
If it falls in the first thrust, I think you've got momentum, you've got the prestige of taking the place, you've got 26 divisions released to be able to reinforce Army Group Centre. My honest belief is that I think it would have altered the German, but I take the point about their egos, Klaus. It's something that I read into all the literature that, that there is as I said, German generals have a habit of trying to impose their will on maps. So you put a city in front of them, they want to take it. It's as simple as that. I take that point. I think Hitler himself would have intervened and said, you know what? The geometry has changed. I really want to look at this in a different way so that we can actually crush them and not take too many hits. I think we need to take into account also the exhaustion and the maintenance difficulties of both the air and the surface elements of the German army and Air Force.
And the weather?
Well, the weather's coming on, yeah. And but as Klaus says, a bit of mud, I think we can deal with that. Seems to have been the attitude, obviously, when you're sitting well back from the front. And I think that's another thing. I think the appreciation of what fighting was like on the front was something that came very late to some of the German General Staff in many ways. Shouldn't be, because some of them had operated there in the First World War.
Well, tied to this, I might just add that Franz Halder, who is really, shall we say, the big string puller here, not Brauchitsch, is a staff officer through and through.
Yeah.
It's not like he ever led a company or a battalion of troops outside Verdun for a few months, just to get a feel for what it felt like. He was, don't get me wrong, serious brain on the man, but he really, in so many ways, is the ultimate chateau general of World War I.
The other thing with Halder is he has a technique in terms of briefing Hitler where he deliberately excludes naysayers. People say, why wasn't I invited to that meeting? And he said, forgot. And it's quite extraordinary. You see a number of occasions where, particularly in forming the plan for Barbarossa, some of the key planners actually get left out because they don't support Halder's view on having Army Group Centre being the most powerful group.
Absolutely fascinating. So the question we started out with, what if the Germans have succeeded in the siege of Leningrad? I guess we're saying it depends when that happens. If it happens early, could perhaps they push on to Moscow? Could they take Moscow? What happens then? Do they come with some agreement to the Soviet Union and don't want to push any further east? Absolutely fascinating. I'm afraid that is all we've got time for today. My thanks to Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry and Dr. Klaus Schmider for joining me, and we'll be back undoing more history very soon. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. And you can also listen and follow the show as a podcast. Just search for History Undone in your podcast apps, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.